Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're going to do, obviously, what you know off the top. Georgia got a massive commitment yesterday. I'll be honest with you, I was not on guard for this really at all, although it obviously comes off of a big official visit weekend. Georgia doing good work here in the month of June. We're going to talk about that. Also, I think there are some people who have tried to kind of make a little bit of a cottage industry around kind of doubting Georgia this offseason. We predicted as we got closer to the start of the season, we'd hear less of that. New information today about why that is true. Mike Griffith stops by. We will talk to him, and we're just going to have a good time. Well, like I said, a little bit of a summer cadence around here, so we're ready to enjoy it. I hope you are too. We're glad you're with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Obviously, we're going to talk today about the commitment yesterday of the four-star cornerback, Justice Fitzpatrick. This was really fun for me because, well, I try to follow stuff as closely as I can, and obviously Justice was a part of a very impressive group of official visitors to Georgia this past week. The truth is, I was not on guard last night to have the Fitzpatrick commitment land kind of right here in our lap. This is interesting on a number of fronts, major programs, St. Thomas Aquinas down there in South Florida. I would say a pretty big flex for a guy like Dante Williams, obviously a T-Rob involved and stuff like this too. You would assume, these Georgia defensive back coaches making a name for themselves as they still in the early stages of their career, kind of a big deal from that. It's Minkah Fitzpatrick's brother. That's one of the most well-known players in the SEC over the course of the last decade or so. So there's a lot to like about this. I would say that another thing that's worth considering here is, look, we're in challenging times when it comes to recruiting. And, of course, Georgia's not getting every single player that it wants. But when you watch the way in which the Georgia recruiting ranking has climbed up and up and up, what are they, 6th now, I think, if you care about, say, 24/7 Sports composite team ranking, something like that. I think that Georgia's up to 6th there on that. So the point is we're kind of in the hot recruiting time of year, and Georgia's sort of right back where you expect it to be in that category of elite recruiting classes once again in 2026. That's obviously, I think, a really good thing. But let me also talk about the Justice Fitzpatrick news from a slightly different vantage point. I don't know why this necessarily is, but this flood of memories came back to me late last night, early this morning when I thought about this. And it's going to be story time with BA just a little bit, and I apologize for that. Hopefully not too long and hopefully interesting, and I think it'll lead to, kind of an important point about Georgia recruiting. I was thinking today, and some last night, a lot this morning. We are coming up on our 10th anniversary as a show, as a website, DawgNation and DawgNation Daily. And so I was thinking a little bit about the first summer that we did this show. We started August of 2015, game week prior to the start of the 2015 season. So our first summer of doing the show was the first summer that Kirby Smart spent as the Georgia coach. And at the time when we started this, it was a little bit different to have a show like this that showed up every single day. Back then, podcasts were kind of a weekly thing. We were among the first podcasts to say, hey, we're going to do this every day. We're essentially going to deliver it to you like a radio show through the podcast medium. And, not to sound immodest, but we got a lot of attention for that kind of right out of the gate because we had people saying, I can't believe you do this every day. I was just sort of tuning in to see if you were going to have something to talk about. It was a little bit, I would say, unique at the time to be able to kind of come in every single day, and what a lot of people kind of thought of as the dead of the off season, and talk about Georgia football every single day. But for me, that was a really fun time in my life. Obviously, I was really excited about the job that I was doing. We were still very new in DawgNation Daily at that point. We were not on video yet. a lot of you know, this is kind of like early days back when I was literally doing the show out of a closet in my house. You look around now and you see the studio we have a chance to work out of. It did not look like that way at all back then. It was literally, I'd stapled like mattress covers to a closet as a way of kind of creating a soundproof environment, or at least a non-echoey environment. That's how we were doing the show. But like my daughter had recently been born. This was like our family kind of taking its full formation the way that it kind of is now. This was kind of a fun time in life. And it was also, I would say, for me, a fun time in the life of someone who enjoys observing what was going on with Georgia football, because these were the early days of Kirby Smart. And what was interesting about Smart at that time was, and you look back on this, it seems more clear now than it perhaps did then. This was Smart, I think, really demonstrating that he could be his own man as a head coach, because now we know Kirby Smart as the best coach in college football, the two-time national champion. He's a Georgia alumnus. You can't be more Georgia than Kirby Smart is. But y'all, if you have a memory of this, you can look back on this and see. That is not the way necessarily Smart was treated back then. Back then, Smart was sort of treated as a guy who was kind of annexing Georgia football on behalf of Alabama. That Kirby Smart had worked with Nick Saban at Alabama for such a long time that the hire of Kirby Smart by some of the national media was kind of treated as like the annexation of Georgia football by Alabama, and that Georgia was now going to be just sort of Alabama Junior, and this program that had a history of its own was essentially just going to borrow the history, the tradition, the track record of success of Alabama. That was some of the national media narrative. Some of you can remember that 10 years ago. You can kind of remember how that was the case. And what was fun for me about that very first summer of 2016, we were doing this show, what's fun for me on that is seeing the ways in which, and a lot of this was subtle. I mean, that's what's going to lead to the Justice Fitzpatrick thing in a second. A lot of this was subtle, but seeing the ways in which Kirby Smart demonstrated, no, he's not Nick Saban's protege, and no, he's not turning Georgia into Alabama Junior, that he's going to stand up, be his own man. He's not going to work for Nick Saban anymore. He's not going to work with Nick Saban anymore. He is now competing alongside Nick Saban, and obviously within a few years, he'd beat Nick Saban in a national championship game. That's what the first summer of Kirby Smart was about. In fact, let me show you this on the screen for a minute. Bleacher Report was a website, still is, but back then, website doing a lot of college football coverage. Our buddy Barrett Slee actually wrote this story. The headline was, Maurice Smith saga shows Kirby Smart is a threat to Nick Saban. Do you remember Maurice Smith? Smith was an Alabama defensive back. This is like way before transfer portal. This is kind of back when like grad transfers were sort of a big deal. And, you know, the ability to kind of transfer in the SEC. Now you can just do whatever you want to, at least for the most part. Back then, transferring, you still kind of needed permission to transfer. Smith had graduated from Alabama. He wanted to leave Alabama, and obviously coming to a place like Georgia where he knew Kirby Smart and knew the defensive system, seemed like a pretty good place to land. It was very controversial at that time for someone like Maurice Smith to leave Alabama and go to Georgia, and for a coach like Kirby Smart to essentially bite the hand that had fed him in the eyes of some, of allowing Maurice Smith to leave Alabama, come to Georgia. Now, as it worked out, Maurice Smith ended up being among Georgia's most important players in 2016. But the way that he got eligible at Georgia is that the Smith family had to, perhaps with some encouragement from Georgia, kind of fight for their chance to be eligible at Georgia to get the transfer granted within the SEC because he was a grad transfer. And Alabama people were just aghast that Kirby Smart might take a transfer from Alabama. Who is this guy to betray us after all those years in which he worked for us? But in the eyes of Kirby Smart, this was an example of, I used to work with you, but now I'm working against you. I'm going to compete for myself. The Maurice Smith was an example of that. Some writers, such as Barrett Slee, took notice saying, okay, well now Georgia's going to be a threat to Alabama. Kirby Smart's going to be a threat to Nick Saban. He's going to try to be his own man. And there would be subtle examples of that in the next couple of years that I think sort of showcase this, which perhaps way back then kind of planting the seeds that eventually grew to the commitment we saw yesterday from the 4-star cornerback, Justice Fitzpatrick. As we told you, and as you already know, his brother was Minkah Fitzpatrick. There was another one of these things, not summer of 2016, it'd be about a year or so later, that also kind of signified for Kirby Smart, I'm my own man, I'm going to do it my way, and I might subtly remind you that I'm going to be a little bit of a thorn in your side if you're Alabama and if you're Nick Saban. A lot of this came up with Minkah Fitzpatrick and a little bit of an insinuation from Kirby Smart that perhaps Kirby may have known a lot more about how good of a player Minkah Fitzpatrick at Alabama was going to turn out to be than maybe even Nick Saban did. There was a big story just prior to the 2017 national championship game involving Georgia and Alabama that I would suggest did not exactly paint Saban in the most flattering light when it comes to Minkah Fitzpatrick. And obviously, I'm allowing my imagination to run wild on this a little bit. I don't deny that. But I do think the dots are interesting to connect, especially when you see all these years later. It seems like the Fitzpatrick family has a closer relationship with Kirby Smart in Georgia than it did to Alabama. Alabama not even one of Fitzpatrick's 5 finalists. Let me show you a couple of things here from an old story out of ESPN.com. This is just prior to the 2017 national championship. Ivan Mizell was the writer. The headline is "The Strange Recruiting Tale of an Alabama All-American." So what Mizell writes is there was a hitch in signing Fitzpatrick by Alabama, where it almost turned out that Bama did not sign Fitzpatrick. And as Mizell wrote, he says, this wasn't a case of Smart trying to rattle Saban on the eve of a national championship game by talking about this. He says he made the comment in the middle of the season when asked how Saban had widened his recruiting radius from a 5-hour drive from Tuscaloosa to a 5-hour flight. He says there are 2 starters in the secondary, Minkah Fitzpatrick and redshirt senior Anthony Averett, who are from New Jersey, who sort of stand as an example of that. I'll show you the next one on these screen here. Or in the story, Nick Saban essentially denied the idea that he didn't want to sign Minkah Fitzpatrick. He says, I don't ever remember a time from the time he came to Alabama's football camp and I met him, the kind of person he is, the kind of family he has, the kind of competitor he is, that I had any doubt about him being a player. But my memory at my age may not be quite as good as some others. I'm not trying to discredit anyone here. So Kirby Smart plants the seeds that they didn't want Minkah Fitzpatrick. Saban says, I don't remember that. But, months prior to this game between Georgia and Alabama, the quote from Kirby Smart is, what's amazing is we almost didn't take both those guys, one of them being Fitzpatrick. I mean, that's crazy. We're sitting there debating the last few days if they were good enough. You just never know. And the question comes, even Minkah Fitzpatrick? And the quote from Kirby is, Saban didn't like Minkah at one point. That to me was just crazy because Mario Cristobal and I were fighting like heck for Fitzpatrick. We thought he was such a good kid. So this is a very small thing, but it does sort of stand alongside some of the stuff that sort of went on back then, to try to use proper English. Some of the stuff that sort of went on back then, where when Kirby Smart had a chance to demonstrate, I'm my own guy. I don't work for Nick Saban anymore. When I can be a thorn in Nick Saban's side, that's what I'm going to be. That's sort of what he did. He wrestled Maurice Smith away from the Alabama roster, brought him to Georgia. Smith was arguably Georgia's most important defensive player in 2016. He took these sort of subtle jabs as well of, Nick Saban didn't even really want Minkah Fitzpatrick. I had to convince him he was that good. And at the time, it seems like sort of a small thing. The truth is, Alabama went on to use Minkah Fitzpatrick to win the national championship that year. So all of a sudden, maybe all's well that ends well on the side of the Crimson Tide. But here we are all these years later, and the next potentially great member of this Fitzpatrick football family, all of a sudden now, based on the commitment yesterday, is coming to Georgia and not going to a place like Alabama. In fact, we're led to believe that Alabama wasn't even a huge factor in his recruitment. Of course, Nick Saban has since retired. But it's these relationships that Kirby Smart has established, has built, the ability to go to Justice's family and say, hey, I knew your brother was going to be great way before Nick Saban did. I knew your brother was going to be great way before maybe anybody else did. I've always believed in your family. I've always known how good Minka was, and I have that same level of belief and trust in how good you can be as well. As I said, it's just sort of one of those things that kind of demonstrates the importance of relationships when it comes to recruiting. Many of these relationships long established, roots planted many, many years ago. You know, Kirby talked about this the other day, not Justice Fitzpatrick in particular. He can't mention him by name right now. But when he was with McElroy and Kublik, the radio show, the interview that he was with at the Celebrity Golf Tournament a couple of weeks ago, you know, the subject of how come Georgia doesn't have a GM? You know, how come Georgia hasn't hired the sort of figure that exists around college programs? And the sort of relationships I'm describing here, where Smart can speak in the first person about how much the family has meant to him for as long as it is, his own evaluations being trusted. I knew Minka Fitzpatrick was good before anybody else did, that sort of thing. Smart says that's the reason why I don't need a GM, because a GM that we bring from someplace outside of our football family is not going to have relationships with players like Justice Fitzpatrick the way I'm able to have. This is what Smart said about that not too long ago.
I don't want a GM tag to say, okay, well, this guy's going to just go and be the negotiator. He's going to go and close the deal and sign the deal. It's still a relationship business for us. If we were drafting and we could go across the state and say, okay, this is our draft pick, I think a GM role is really, really important. But when you have to have a relationship with somebody, how does that GM have a relationship with somebody when they have been watching tape? They're not spending time with them. Most of those GMs that are true GMs, they don't want to recruit. They don't want to have a relationship. They came from NFL because they weren't doing those things. So they become transactional. And look, we find our niche in our culture, which is relational and trying to have a relationship with somebody. We have people that do GM jobs. We don't sit here and say, well, Coach Smart does everything. I can't do everything. We have people that talk numbers. We have people that do different things. Sure. We just don't have somebody that's making the ultimate decision.
So let me kind of sum all this up this way. The point I'm getting to is this. When a guy like Justice Fitzpatrick commits to Georgia, there are sort of two twin pillars of conversation you can explore on this. There are the basic facts. We gave those to you a little earlier. He allows Georgia to now climb the recruiting rankings and make that pursuit of another elite signing class here in 2026. When you pair him along with a guy like Jordan Smith from Houston County and others that we expect to come, the Georgia situation at defensive back for this class is starting to look really good. And a guy like Dante Williams gets a chance to kind of put himself in a nice spotlight with Georgia fans as he continues to introduce himself to Georgia fans in what is still the early days of his tenure. It also shows that while Georgia doesn't get everyone that it wants, big NIL money going in the direction of a Mark Bowman or a Jackson Cantwell, perhaps even others before this class is done, Georgia, still gets plenty. And Georgia still has this recruiting game figured out, even in these challenging times we live with. Those are sort of the basic facts of a Justice Fitzpatrick commitment. But there's also a little bit of a deeper meaning. And the question that a lot of Georgia fans, I think, gravitate towards is, well, how exactly do you get these things done? And as I just pointed out, we see from Kirby Smart, these sort of recruiting battles are won over the period of multiple years, over the course of a family relationship that connects Kirby to the older brother and the parents around that and the other figures close to the family. And Kirby can say, I've known you a long time. I knew your brother was great before anybody else did, including perhaps even Nick Saban. That's the sort of long-standing, deep roots Kirby has with a player like Justice Fitzpatrick. That's one of the main reasons that Kirby Smart wins a recruiting battle like this, and one of the main reasons why Georgia has to be viewed as a favorite for a lot more of these recruiting battles in the years to come. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're glad to have you with us. Good recruiting news for Georgia. Always a fun thing to do on a Wednesday. We're glad to have you with us as we do, whether you join us live on video 10 a.m., all the video platforms, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, the world-famous DawgNation.com. As I said, there was a time years ago where I'm literally in a little closet. I'd taken a screwdriver, taken the shelves off the wall, had to staple up the mattress covers to kind of give us a place to do it. When I had a guest in the show, had to go get a phone cord and stick it in the wall so we could kind of dial the phone and bring the guest on. That's the way we spoke to our people back then. So much has changed. You look around now, you see this wonderful studio. We're thankful for all of it. And of course, today, our folks at Breda Pest Management, that's who make it possible. Now, I'll tell you this really quick. I did a long story a minute ago. This is going to be a short story. This is a funny thing. So do you ever have these dreams, like these recurring dreams where a common one I think I've had, y'all probably had it too, where, okay, you're in college and you forgot you even had a class, and all of a sudden it's exam day and you haven't been to the class all semester long. I feel like I have that. There's all these like recurring dreams that you have where you haven't done something you're supposed to do. Do you know this? And this is as true a story as I can give, otherwise I wouldn't be telling it. I have some of those sometimes related to the show too. And this is hand to the sky. This is a true story. So the other night I was dreaming literally about Breda Pest Management and of doing the show, and it's like late in the show, and it occurred to me, wait a second, did I not do the Breda Pest Management rate? Did I forget to do that? Which gives you an idea of how even my dreams are sort of boring, unfortunately. But I was literally like other night dreaming about doing the show. It's sort of late in the show. I'm thinking back, wait, did I forget to do the most important thing to do of the day? So today, I'm not going to forget to do that, even though I did forget to do that in my dreams. I am so thankful to have our folks at Breda Pest Management as a part of our program. I love the fact that they do allow us to speak to you each and every day here, but I also like the fact they take care of business for you. If you're a homeowner, obviously, you got to take care of your home. And if you live in Georgia, one of the most important things to do to take care of your home is protect it from termites, for instance. Look, in Georgia, because of our soil and things like that, I guess, I really don't even know why, termites are just a fact of life. You're going to, if you don't take care of your property, you're going to have them. That's just going to be the way it goes. So you got to have that termite protection. You probably already have the company that you're working with. And if you're like a lot of the people that I know, there's some frustration sometimes around the termite company that you might be working with because it seems like the cost of service is going up, the quality of service is going down. For instance, they don't come inside your home, or they don't, there are these like little extra service offerings. It doesn't quite seem like they offer as much anymore. Well, our friends from Breda Pest Management are not going to be like that. They're big dog fans, closely connected to our audience and major, into taking care of Georgia fans and being big Georgia fans. And Matt Breda's a big sports fan in general, but loves Georgia football. You see him in our comment section going back and forth with the Georgia fans and obviously taking care of some of those trolling non-Georgia fans that show up. That's just what they're all about. But also they want to exist to serve you when you're ready to make that switch, when you're ready to put more money back in your pocket by trusting Breda Pest Management, a multi-generational company that's been in business since 1975, taking care of people just like you. It's time now to get that done. So please find them online. It's BredaPest.com, BREDA, BredaPest.com for more on that. One more time, BREDA, BredaPest.com for a lot more on that. All right, we are going to talk to Mike Griffith here coming up in just a moment. Mike, was at SEC spring meetings in Destin, Florida last week, and we continue to get more information about kind of what took place at SEC spring meetings last week. We didn't get like the official announcements about here's what the schedule's going to look like, or here's this, or here's that. But there was, I think, something very important that did come out of the SEC spring meetings. We've talked about this plenty, which is there is something, if it's not quite unity, there is at least a consensus being formed by the key figures in the SEC about what they want the college football playoff to be moving forward. I do think this is important. We'll talk to Mike about that here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, we talked about recruiting off the top of the show. Let's bring it back to Georgia on the field for 2026 here right now. Here is a point that we have made, that when you think about the offseason, as I said, we've been doing content daily, 52 weeks a year for 10 years. We've never had an issue coming up with things to talk about. There's always stuff going on. That's just what we love. We love showing up and talking about the news of the day. I would say, though, that because when you're in the off season, you can kind of feel a long way away from the new season, sometimes that causes people to kind of go a little wild. And you see some crazy takes, you see some stuff like that sometimes is just a little strange. And an example of that are some of the, I would say, hottish takes that we have seen about Georgia over the course of recent weeks, recent months, where a lot of people have you believe, this is not a preseason top 10 team. This is a team that's going to miss the college football playoff. And they cite all kinds of reasons. Now, we have certainly said that there are some legitimate questions to be answered for Georgia. We don't shy away from that. We talked yesterday about the possibility that the Georgia offensive line, as one writer puts it, may give Kirby Smart some sleepless nights. Well, hey, maybe that's the case. Maybe that is a concern. Obviously, if you did feel like your offensive line wasn't quite perfect, you would have some concerns about that. We don't dispute that there are some things that Georgia from a year ago needs to improve on this year. Otherwise, when it comes time for a deep run in the college football playoff, Georgia won't be able to do it. This is not fairy tale. We're certainly not going to live in some sort of world of fiction where anything's going to be easy for Georgia this year. But we would say comfortably that some of the doom and gloom projections for Georgia have been grotesquely overstated. And the simple point we've made here is that people have a right to their opinions. And we certainly don't see, we would never pretend that we have some sort of, cornered the market on the absolute total truth. College football has a way of surprising us. There's plenty of things that'll unfold, including with Georgia in this upcoming season, that perhaps we wouldn't be able to confidently and comfortably predict right now. We've said that. But for the people who I believe are being a little reckless in saying, things are terrible for Georgia, all I'm saying is, and I said this I think last week, if you're out, we're just going to say you got to stay out. That right now, as we kind of move into the true summer with the season and fall camp only a few weeks away, it's time to kind of go on the record. It's time to make not your just asking questions routine or your, hey, look at me, here's my wild take. No, now it's time to make official predictions. Now it's time to go on the record. And if you're out on Georgia now, you don't get to get back in later on. You just don't. If you're out, we're going to ask that you stay out. And if you are out on Georgia, be very, very careful for reasons I'm about to explain to you. We've talked on our show a little bit the last couple of days about Bill Conley, math expert, analytics type guy, nerd, type thing, calculator, whatnot, from ESPN. And Conley has the proprietary formula known as SP+. I will tell you right now, I am not smart enough to tabulate this data on my own or even explain to you in simple terms how he tabulates it, but it is a respected analytics formula. I would say it's the first and probably still most famous analytics formula in wide usage around college football. He has published new data to ESPN.com. I'm going to show it to you on the screen. According to his data, the team's most likely to win the national championship for the upcoming season. And here's what you'll notice. Texas comes in at number 1 on that list. So for those who are saying, Arch Manning overrated or, Texas, soft schedule, kind of feasting on that, the truth is the data would suggest that Texas is going to probably be a pretty good team, so we're not going to make too big of a deal about Texas being overrated. But more important to this audience and more important to you in particular is look who is next on Conley's list based on his data, not his opinion, not whatever, but the data he tabulates. Look who is next on the list of teams most likely win the national championship. It is Georgia, which he gives a national championship percentage of 17.5%, which seems really high to me. I mean, once again, I don't pretend to be some sort of, math expert, but that seems really high. In fact, for some context here, if you're not watching on video, I'll try to describe this. If you are watching on video, you see a whole bunch of numbers on the screen. It's the far right column that we're looking at here, though. That Texas has a 22.2% chance of winning the national championship. Georgia has a 17.5% chance of winning the national championship. There are only 2 other teams in America, according to Conley, with a double-digit percentage chance of winning the national championship. Ohio State, sort of far below Georgia, at 11.6. Alabama next on the list at 10.4. Then you get to like Penn State at 7.6, Oregon at 4.8, Clemson at 3.8, Miami at 3.2. I mean, you get down to like, low single digits in terms of a chance, essentially kind of a 1 in 100 shot of winning the national title, that according to Conley, the most likely national champions are 4 teams, 4 sort of usual suspects in many ways: Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama. The only team that Georgia is listed behind is a team that it beat 2 times a year ago. Now, here's the point. This alone should not convince you that Georgia's winning the national championship. As I said before, a lot of this is just anybody's sort of best guess. But if you are convinced because you don't like Mike Bobo, or you don't like Gunnar Stockton, or you don't like Stacey Searles, or you don't, like Georgia's new position in this new NIL landscape, like if you've used something to assume that Georgia is just going to fall apart and go 9-3 or 8-4, or the famous Nolan Smith 7-5, which I say kiddingly, my only encouragement is just be careful. Just be careful. My whole goal, to give you a little inside information here, my whole goal in doing this show, because we do it every day, because we've done it for 10 years, because I plan on doing it for many decades into the future, my whole goal is to obviously try to give a provocative opinion on this show, but to be very careful not saying something that I don't immediately regret within like a few months. I don't want a lot of receipts out there of this is the dumbest thing imaginable now, proven wrong like 6 weeks after you said it. I don't want those kinds of things on my resume, because it becomes a lot harder to do the show if you've got a lot of those things in your track record. If I said dumb things, I'm sure I've said plenty. But we do try to be careful to make sure that if we give an extraordinarily hot take or really provocative opinion, that it's not quickly and easily proven wrong within like a few months. We try to be careful about that. And for the people who have given like really hot takes about Georgia, about any of the issues that I just described, just keep this in mind. Someone like Bill Connelly still views Georgia as the second most likely team to win the national championship here this year, and conservatively among the 4 teams with the best chance of winning the title. And guess what that means? The gambling odds will closely reflect this as well. The gambling odds will influence the human voters. And when the coaches poll and the AP poll comes out later on this summer, Georgia's going to be kind of like right there, preseason top 4, maybe 5th at the worst, but they're not going to be 8th, 9th, or 10th. That's just not what Georgia's going to be to begin the season. So for people who've tried to tell you, 9-3, 8-4, missing the playoff, not a top 10 team, they may turn out to be right. Sometimes people are. But the data is not really on their side. And the people who are just sort of throwing it out there and throwing it against the wall and seeing what sticks, we're going to remember. We're going to remember. And if you're out on Georgia now, you don't get to get back in once they prove you wrong. And oftentimes that's what Georgia does. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, Georgia Farm Bureau proves you right, because the one thing you've heard me say for a very long time is when it's time to trust a company for your insurance needs, one of the best decisions you're going to make is to trust a group of Georgians that can help get that done for you. Georgia Farm Bureau has been serving Georgians for a long time. Now, this sort of starts off in kind of our agricultural community. Georgia's famous for its food. This is a great place that's growing great food, and obviously, cattle, things like that. The food that's on the plates for Georgians and folks around the world comes from Georgia, and the farmers who make that possible, Georgia Farm Bureau has existed to serve them. But that same level of service they now want to provide to you for your auto insurance needs, your home insurance needs, perhaps life insurance, a lot of financial services type things. They can do all of that for you. I've said it now for years. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. Time for you to find out for yourself. Give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050, or online, gfbinsurance.com. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team, and a big part of Around the Doghouse with us here today. All right, before we're done, we actually have a lot to get into. One of the most, I would say, interesting and most important players in college football has made a very bold prediction. It stirred up all kinds of controversy. We'll give you that. In fact, we have controversy coming from like 2 or 3 different places before the show is done here today. So we'll touch on all that in a little bit. But for now, on everything going on with the Georgia Bulldogs, let's talk to Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll bring in Mike Griffith here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Mike, I want to get into more of what happened in Destin with you in a moment. I think we have an interesting consensus kind of coming out of this from the SEC, which I think is important to discuss. But prior to that, I do think it's interesting. I'm not a math expert. I certainly don't have the kinds of computational skills to be someone who easily explains all the analytic stuff. But I do think some of the hard data we're seeing coming out, ESPN FPI, ESPN SP Plus, things like that, I do think stand in sharp contrast to some of the easier to produce sort of hot takes of the offseason that somehow Georgia's this incredibly flawed and problematic team. Bill Conley says, according to his data, second most likely team to win the national championship, one of only 4 teams with sort of double-digit percentage chance to win the national title. I take a lot more comfort in something like that than some of the hot takes that have existed. What say you?
Well, I understand why there's concerns with Georgia football. All you had to do was listen to the head coach or watch the G-Day game. But, as we've talked about before on this program, everybody's flawed. Texas is going to have a new starting quarterback at the start of the season, and they're also losing 4 offensive linemen. The difference and what throws a monkey wrench into these sort of computer metrics is the transfer portal. And a lot of these rankings are based on kids' recruiting rankings. For example, Gunnar Stockton came out as the number 7 player in his class at quarterback. If he turns out to be the number 7 junior quarterback in the nation, I would say Georgia's in really good shape. But right now, I don't think he's the number 7 quarterback in the SEC, if we're being honest about it. So a lot of this is going to be determined on quarterback play, and a lot of this is going to be determined on if those star rankings come to fruition, because that is a part of the formula, as is returning production. And so I think they're interesting. I do think Georgia is a championship contender. I don't think I would have them ranked number 2 on my preseason list right now. I would have them in my top 10, probably right around 5, 6, 4, something like that, just because I have a lot of confidence in Kirby Smart and the staff. I think the defense is going to be vastly improved. I think the skill set players are going to be improved. Don't think they're elite like they once were when Stetson was the quarterback. But I don't know that you need to be anymore because there's so much more parity to the game. So the most exciting thing for me was seeing 3 of the top 4 games, most anticipated games, are going to be Georgia football games. And really 5, what was it, Brandon? 5 of the top 17. So, we've got an unbelievable season on tap. You've got an ultra-competitive coach in Kirby Smart. This team is going to work really hard. You know that. Kirby made it very clear at the start of spring drills. He was raising the bar. He said some of these guys didn't want to be coached hard enough. He said, all these freshmen were out of shape. He really went after them. He accelerated the preparation schedule. So I think Georgia's going to be loaded for bear when they go to Neyland Stadium. I think that's a game they're going to win. And then we're going to find out a lot more about Georgia when they play Alabama September 27th between the hedges.
So here's what it comes down to for me. Right now, Georgia's one of 3 teams in the SEC with a win total projection of 9.5. That's a significant number because a year ago, 9-3, which is just below the 9.5 number, wasn't good enough to get Bama, Ole Miss, or South Carolina into the playoff. 10-2 obviously would. It's also worth pointing out that last year's national champion, Ohio State, was also 10-2 in the regular season. So 9-3 keeps you home. 10-2 may be good enough for the national title. It's a huge swing. So my question for you is, are you over or under on Georgia and 9.5?
Probably on the under, but I think that they'll make the playoff.
So you think 9-3 Georgia makes the playoff?
I do, because I think that the College Football Playoff Committee, a couple things have changed. They've changed some members of the committee. Mark D'Antonio and Ivan Maisel have gotten in there. So I think knowledge is big. And the way the SEC's doubled down, Brandon, on the College Football Playoff Committee and the charge to use schedule strength, I don't think that you can have a chairman hijack it like Ward Manuel did last year and completely ignore the directive from the executive committee leader, which is what happened. I mean, the schedule strength was supposed to be the number 1 metric, and last year's College Football Playoff Committee thumbed their nose at it. And when I asked Ward Manuel about that on one of those college football playoff committee phone calls, he said, well, teams don't control their record. Yeah, that's okay, but you can't ignore the metric. You can't just throw that out because, well, they couldn't control who they play. Well, actually, they can control who they play to a degree. They do schedule their non-conference games. Let's take a closer look at who Ohio State played in the non-conference last year. Let's remember that Ohio State was a fourth-place team that got to host a first-round game because of those rankings. Now, Brennan, I'm not suggesting that Ohio State couldn't have gone on the road and won a playoff game, but they didn't have to. And to me, that was a problem. It was a flaw in the system. And seeing Indiana, I don't remember who they beat of significance last year.
Michigan was the best win.
What was the best win?
Michigan would have been their best win.
What was their best win, did you say?
I said Michigan.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what Michigan was 6-5.
Right.
They did rally to beat. They did rally to beat Ohio State by double digits, and
Right.
so much that Ohio State got punished for that. But my point is, I had a hard time, like Kirby Smart said in Destin. I had a hard time seeing Ole Miss, Alabama, and South Carolina overlooked for Indiana. I don't believe Indiana would have been able to beat any of those teams.
I agree with you on that 100%. But now, to be fair, here's what we've been saying: that if you want to be under on Georgia, because I do think that 9-3, 10-2 is a pretty big hinge point. I don't have any confidence that, based on a year ago, that a 9-3 team makes the college ball playoff. That if you end up being right and Georgia loses 3 games in this regular season, I've got no problem bringing you back on the show, and obviously we will, and say, "Hey, Mike."
No, wait a minute, Brandon. We're
But
talking in June. We're talking on June the 4th.
Right, but that's the point, though. That's the point, though, is that now it's time to formulate some real opinions. And as we've been saying, if you're out on Georgia, we are going to remember. So we are going to remember. So
well, I've got to be honest about what I saw in the spring game. Now, Gunnar Stockton's got 27 practices between now and the opening kickoff. And if he looks like a different quarterback that's not overthrowing open guys, that according to his head coach, that's not making the wrong read according to his head coach, then I'm going to have a completely different opinion. But until Gunnar Stockton shows me that he can play on a level with at least Stetson Bennett or Carson or close to Carson Beck, then it's hard to predict that Georgia can win with a quarterback who can't hit open receivers and who can't make the right decisions in his 4th year. That's what I've seen so far, and I saw 10 points against Notre Dame. Now, if Gunnar Stockton is getting his act together this summer, then I have a completely different opinion. But as of right now, based on what I saw in the G-Day game, I don't have a lot of confidence in Gunnar Stockton. That's where it comes from. Now, if he goes out there and lights up, I don't know if Marshall really leads him, but at least if he's throwing the ball accurately and he's making good reads and the head coach feels confident in him, and we're not talking about a competition with Puglisi, then I'm going to have a completely different opinion. But based on what I've seen so far, and you've said it yourself, you try to be as honest as you can be. Sure. I just can't go all bullish and in on Georgia at this stage. Now that 9-3 record, I predict they'll make the playoff, even if they're 9-3, because they have a hellacious schedule. That's part of the reason why I'm on the under, because the schedule is murderous once again. That's part of it. But another part of it is, I think if Gunnar Stockton does look a little rusty early, does maybe drop a game before mid-October, I think he's a guy, if Kirby sticks with him, that will get better as the season progresses. And so, a 9-3 season is not being out on Georgia. It's saying that based on what I've seen right now, I don't have a lot of confidence in the quarterback, 1. And 2, I think Georgia has a tough enough schedule, will get better as the season progresses, and will make the college football playoff next year.
But either way, it would still be an under. And understand this, the door swings both ways in this. And like I said, I'm not like it. It's a valid opinion. I mean, we've heard, prominent voice say not top 10. We've heard prominent voices say maybe miss the playoffs. So, there are prominent voices who are down on Georgia. It's a valid opinion, and I'm more than happy to say if they do lose 3 times, I'm more than happy to give you the platform in December.
I'm not saying down.
No.
You just said down.
We'll take the word. You're under. You'd be an under on Georgia if they do.
On 9.5. Yeah.
If they do lose 3 times, I'm more than happy to bring you on in December and January, whenever we know that for sure. It would have been December, and say, hey, you were the brave truth teller back when, someone like me was still, pretty high on Georgia. You were the one that was saying, I told you so about Gunnar Stockton. G-Day told me everything I needed to know. They lost 3 times. If you get it right, I'm more than happy to give you the platform to be able to say that. But
I'm making this pick on June the 3rd based on the schedule strength, which I anticipate Alabama to be very good. But this attempt to try to pin me down on Georgia is very inaccurate. You have to look at the schedule. You have to look at last season. I thought last season's team was pretty good, right? And they lost a couple of games. In hindsight, I look at that Ole Miss game and I go, oh my gosh, how in the world did Georgia lose to Ole Miss by that big of a margin when Kentucky beat Ole Miss and when Florida was able to beat Ole Miss? The SEC's tough, man, and you lose the wrong players in the wrong places, and things can go south pretty quick. We saw that with the offensive line last year. So again, the only reason that right now on June the 4th, you're asking me this question is because I haven't seen enough from Gunnar Stockton. And anybody that says they have is looking through rose-colored glasses. He didn't play that well in the second half of the SEC championship game. He was fortunate he didn't fumble when he got knocked out. I think it was the knockout reflex. I'm pretty sure he turned the ball over. He had another ball that was knocked away that went out of bounds. And he was flat against Notre Dame. All I'd heard about was, how much Gunnar Stockton makes his teammates better. I didn't see that against Notre Dame. And that wasn't a great Notre Dame team. Let's remember, they lost to Northern Illinois at home. So all I'm saying is until I see quarterback play that I believe is on the level with some of these other programs, I'm skeptical. And you're asking me to be honest. And right now, I don't think Gunnar Stockton is an elite. Kirby Smart says it. You're either elite or you're not. Gunnar Stockton has not shown me that he's an elite talent at quarterback yet at the collegiate level. He's a great kid. He's a great representative. He's probably the hardest worker in there. I've heard from Jake Fromm. He's a film rat. You want this guy to succeed. I will be pulling for a guy like Gunnar Stockton to succeed. But at this point, there is not evidence that he is a championship level quarterback at this point.
So let me just say one more thing about this, and then I want to talk about a couple other issues because we do have slightly small degree breaking news here that I'll give you here in a second. The reason why this matters to Georgia fans, and I'm only partially picking on you, but this is obviously a lot bigger than you, because what Georgia fans have to endure a lot is, in the off season when people can just sort of say whatever and hope nobody remembers it 3 or 4 weeks later or a couple of months later, there's a lot of frankly, Stetson Bennett wasn't ever very good in many people's eyes until he won 2 national championships. And Georgia had no chance of repeating in 2022 because of all they lost to the 2021 team until they actually did. See, a lot of Georgia fans have pretty vivid memories of a lot of the stuff that gets said about Stetson Bennett, about the team itself, along the way to back-to-back national champions. And when Georgia dared play the nobody believed in us card, when that was done, a lot of media types tried to rewrite history and say, oh, who was it that didn't believe in Georgia? But we can cite examples going into the Tennessee game, all kinds of stuff that got said about Stetson Bennett throughout the entirety of his Georgia career, where all of a sudden now that the 2 championships are, kind of hanging on the wall, a lot of what got said during that time sort of gets memory hold. So what I'm trying to do on behalf of Georgia fans right now is saying, we're just not going to memory hold this stuff right now. That if people want to go on the record and say, Georgia loses 3 times, Georgia whatever, then they may be proven right. Obviously, if a negative appraisal of Georgia before last season would have certainly been proven true, at least in terms of making a deep run in the college ball playoff. The naysayers may be right. We can't guarantee they won't be. But we are going to remember who the naysayers were.
Okay, well, I hope you remember that they were picked to win. They were picked preseason number 1 the last 2 years and didn't. And I was one of the people that believed that. I thought Georgia was going to win a 3rd national championship in a row, and I was wrong about that. I was right about 2021 Georgia being a championship team. We were right when we broke the news that Stetson Bennett was going to get the start over Carson Beck against UAB. And let's be honest, Stetson Bennett, to me, he did win the championship, but You take a look at what Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers and James Cook are doing right now, and you take a look at the 5 number 1 picks on the defensive line. I dare say there were a lot of quarterbacks in the SEC. Maybe I can think of 3 or 4 off the top of my head that you could have put under center that would have won a title that year. That's not to diminish that Stetson did it, had to come through in the clutch of the fourth quarter, but it sure as hell helped that you had a number 1 defense on the other side of the ball, and Brock Bowers catching balls that were, behind his back, over his head, and James Cook breaking off 64-yard runs. I mean, to me, when we talk about a 2-time championship quarterback, and I do think that is the most important position, and I do think Stetson Bennett was clutch, you got to look at a 2-time championship defense. You got to look at a 2-time championship running back and a 2-time, most of all, you got to look at Brock Bowers, a go-to guy like no other. To me, that was the linchpin when I would talk to opponents about what made Georgia special. Nobody could come up with a plan to stop this guy. He was a third down dream. The Matrix play against Ohio State still resonates. Brandon, one of the greatest college football plays I've ever seen. The defensive performance against the number 1 Tennessee team in the rain at Sanford Stadium, unbelievable. The way the crowd got involved, there was so much to it. Stetson was the quarterback, and Stetson earned his championships. But I can't sit here and tell you that I'm going to put him on the same level as Joe Burrow, at least not until he takes 1 snap in the NFL. We did a poll on this. I don't know if he will or he won't. I'd like to see him get an opportunity. If Justin Fields is on his 3rd opportunity, can we see Stetson Bennett get 1? Because he is a playmaker. And once he learns the offense, maybe he can do great things in the NFL, just like he did at Georgia, right? But when we talk about Hall of Fame quarterbacks and all-time great quarterbacks and elite talent, I mean, I've got Stetson Bennett as a 2-time champion. I don't know many other people that have done that. I think you got to give him his credit, but I don't know that he does that without Brock Bowers. I don't know that he does that without a number 1 defense. Carson Beck didn't have those things. Gunnar Stockton does not have those things.
Let me shift to this. This is small, but it is new. This coming out from Georgia in just the last couple of minutes, that I guess there's going to be a corporate sponsor for the Georgia Tech game this year in November, and then the Georgia-Florida game the following year. If you care, it's Invesco QQQ, which is an investment fund. They are going to sort of host this game between Georgia and Georgia Tech, and obviously the game for Georgia and Florida. When you hear because in my mind, when there was reporting the other day about how much money that they were getting paid to play these games in Atlanta and Tampa, and it's like, when you hear about the number, it's like, well, how are they going to make any money off this? And so you have to sell the corporate sponsorship, because the reporting that I think Evans Banner Hill had was like $7.5 million to both teams, at least in the Georgia-Florida game, for playing in the game. You got to make that money somehow, and obviously, I guess corporate sponsorship is the example of that. It's one of those things, Mike, where I think a lot of us have sort of just made peace with this a little bit. Professional sports all have, logos on the uniforms. I don't think it looks very good, but it's just sort of here to stay. This has been a part of international soccer for a long time. Bowl games have had sponsorships, things like that. So I don't know this will be treated with much controversy necessarily, and perhaps just sort of an easy way to recoup the millions and millions of dollars that Georgia's going to be paid, at least in the case of the Georgia-Florida game, for playing in that game.
Yeah, and that money comes in handy in a lot of different ways, and it can't necessarily go directly to the players, but indirectly it sort of does. Because one of the deals with this NIL, and I don't want to go deep into this, but when you're paying the players all this money, there's going to have to be some streamlining in other places, and Kirby Smart talked about that maybe not necessarily at Georgia, because I think Georgia runs an elite program, and Josh Brooks and Georgia's well funded, but in other programs they're going to cut staff nutritionists. They're going to maybe some of the people that assist with academics in the academic support program, they have to make cuts other places to pay for college athletes, or they have to cut other programs. So the fact that this money gets funneled into the athletic departments helps support the other sports. And Kirby Smart's talked a lot about that lately, about his desire to see these Olympic sports and these non-revenue sports continue to thrive, because that's what gives you opportunity. I mean, heck, Georgia just won a national championship in women's tennis, and albeit the baseball team didn't finish the way either one of us wanted. I know you were at the game as well.
Yeah.
But what a tremendous season. This was such a beloved team. I mean, that was as heartbreaking of a loss as I've seen in a long time. And personally, someone that watched it and enjoyed just that environment. I was I was like, oh man, I mean, this was like my summer plan was, oh, we're going to cover regionals and then we'll be out in Omaha covering the world. I'm not the only one, right? But you want to keep these folks, these other sports funded, and the way to do that is through these major sponsorships. So it's kind of a necessary evil, if you will. I'm kind of with you. I don't like seeing the sponsor logos everywhere, but we're at a place right now where you've got to find a way to get revenue. And if you're not getting it from the sponsors, that means you're going to press the fans even more.
Yeah.
And the ticket prices, I heard someone talk, and I heard a season ticket holder that was saying, "Oh my gosh, the price for this Tennessee game is, whatever, $260 or $320." I said, "Well, take a look at it. If you go through StubHub, it's probably over $500 for some. I know for some of these home games it is, and my goodness, but what a great season we've got ahead." And Brandon, I know you're making your point that we're not going to forget all these. Listen, I think just like I thought last year's season was an unbelievable. I thought it was Kirby Smart's best job ever, even though they lost to Alabama, even though they lost to Notre Dame, even though they lost to Ole Miss. I still had a great appreciation for that season. I think it's harder and harder and harder now to have those undefeated years or those 2-loss years. We think about the Kentucky game. We think about the Georgia Tech game. We think about the Alabama game. There were some 50-50 games. Think about the Texas game, this SEC. There were some games that could have gone either way, and Georgia, I think, did a great job being on the right end of that. How does it look this year? Again, I think there's going to be more 50-50 games, and I think we're going to see Georgia in the college football playoff. 9-3, 10-2, you're asking me which way I'd go? Honestly, I wouldn't make that bet. But you asked me the question. I'm not out there writing that or, bro, hey, Georgia's not. I don't think that. But right now, until I'm just in a skeptical position on Gunner, to the point that I wonder if he'll even be the starter at the end of the year. Part of me wonders if Ryan Puglisi might overtake him if Gunner doesn't get it going in the fall, based on some things that, Kirby, said. He's kind of left that door open on that quarterback room. So unsettled quarterback situation in the SEC, that always makes me nervous.
I'll tell you what, why don't we leave it for there? I want to talk about this stuff from Destin, but I've kept you long. We'll come back and do that next week because I don't think that's going away anytime soon. Mike, we appreciate your time here today. Thanks for being a good sport on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
I'll lick my wounds for a week, Brandon.
No, that's not that. We're just having fun. Good stuff.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, my only point is that I love sports talk. I think sports opinions, hot takes, hotter the better. I think all that's great. But, Georgia fans, I do think, have a memory of a lot of these so-called hot takes that got sort of played for interest in the offseason. And somehow by the time we got to the season, people had a tendency to forget what they had said or hope that we had forgotten what they had said. And around here, we try not to do that. And I'm also gracious enough to say, I want that door to swing both ways. I mean, look, what I've jokingly said in the past is, you can't do this job without being a loudmouth, but I try not to be a blowhard. Do you understand the difference? Like, if you're going to scream into a microphone and sort of keep the show moving, stuff like that, you got to be a little bit of a loud mouth to do the show. And I have a very loud mouth. You have to be a little bit of a loud mouth to do a show. But blowhard is where, like, you're just sort of putting stuff out there and, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that, and this contradicts that thing. And 2 months later, I forgot that I ever said that thing before. You don't want to do that. Be a loudmouth, don't be a blowhard. And I would say the same thing is kind of true for some of this stuff too. In other words, my basic opinion of Georgia for this year is that one way or another, Gunner Stockton's overall stat line, and I do think that Georgia has made it pretty clear that he is their starting quarterback. I think that has been made abundantly clear without announcing him as the starter. It is just obvious that Gunner Stockton is Georgia's starting quarterback. And my assumption, my prediction is that Gunner Stockton's stat line will be pretty closely in line with what the typical Georgia starting quarterback has been. And we've said this before. Even though the personalities of the Georgia quarterbacks are sometimes wildly different, and the offensive coordinators they have worked with have been also significantly different, the actual stat line of Kirby Smart, Georgia starting quarterbacks, touchdown passes thrown, yards per attempt, these numbers that mean the most, they're actually not all that different necessarily. There's a fairly accepted range of performance that you can assume in 2025 or even like 5 years from now, unless something dramatically changes because of, like, say, Jerry Curtis or something. You can sort of assume what you're getting from a Georgia quarterback and be pretty close to accurate. My guess is that Gunnar Stockton is going to play about like a Georgia quarterback typically plays. That's my guess. And my guess is that Georgia is far from done. You have not heard me say they are definitely going to win the national championship. I'd love to be able to do that. We did that in 2022. Remember go for 2 in 22? We did that, and that was really fun. We tried to re-rack it in 2023, and that wasn't quite as fun. We've gotten some stuff wrong before. Of course we have. So I'm not going to get out in front of my own level of confidence as a way of providing counterbalance to the naysayers. I'm just suggesting that somewhere around where the preseason polls are going to have Georgia and where the analytics has Georgia, something around top 4 kind of feels about right. And if they're 10-2 in the regular season, I believe that's the most likely outcome for Georgia. I think 12-0 is essentially impossible. I think 11-1 would be a golf shot, just be absolutely miraculous. 11-1 would be amazing. I think that 10-2 is probably about likely. And I think at 10-2, they are in a similar position to where Ohio State found itself a year ago, using a 2-loss regular season as a springboard to a national championship. That would be a very big possibility for me if against this schedule, Georgia can go 10-2. That's sort of the basic opinion we are here right now, that while I can't guarantee that Georgia wins a national championship, I do believe the demise of Georgia has been grotesquely overstated by some. I do think that's the case. So with that said, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here today. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, the fun stuff involving Star of the Seas right now, as the finishing touches get put on this gorgeous new entrance into the Icon class of ships. This is such an amazing experience. The work's been done here. The inspections are taking place. It's on its way, at least soon to be on its way, sailing across the Atlantic. It's going to land right there. And what it's going to be, it's home at Port Canaveral in Florida. And what I love about that is that, like, that's just like right down the road from here. I do like driving to my cruise vacations. I think it's super convenient to do that. And to think now that we have an Icon class of ship that's going to be housed and homed right there in Port Canaveral, easiest port to get to, I just think that's amazing. I'm so excited about that. And when you hear about these sort of final inspections taking place, people kind of kicking the tires and just sort of making sure that all the spaces on the interior of the ship and obviously the incredible navigation and propulsion, parts of the ship, that they're all working the way they're supposed to, that just lets you know we're getting really, really close to sailing time. And as we get closer to it, I can't wait to tell you all about the really cool things that are going to be on Star of the Seas. In some cases, similar to what was on Icon. In some cases, perhaps different. I can't wait to tell you about all this. But the person who can tell you even more is our friend Jessica Slater, special travel advisor selected for us by Royal Caribbean for all of our Royal Caribbean cruise vacation needs. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. That's the email to get to. You can do all of that and have a great time and be a part of a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation sometime in 2025 or as we roll through 2026. All right, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC right now. Music is totally ended. We got to pick up the pace here a little bit. So let's do that here right now. In fact, can we do this? Beginning of the show, we showed you the SP Plus numbers as it relates to Georgia, second most likely national champion. Let us look at the other SEC teams on this here for a little bit if we possibly can. That graphic from earlier in the show, we saw Texas at number 1 on that list, most likely national champion. I want to park on that just for a moment because I do think that for most of my lifetime, Texas has been overrated. I think Texas themselves would even say that some of their fans a little disappointed in what they've done for a kind of post Vince Young, pre-SEC. I think even Texas fans themselves would say they were a little disappointed in that era. And so because you can't help but be shaped by your previous experiences sometimes, I think people assume, Texas gets hyped up, they play a soft schedule, therefore they are likely overrated again. But it's really important to point this out. They are the only team in America to be in the playoff 2 years in a row, and the Final Four in both those years. That, prior to coming to the SEC, Steve Sarkisian made, I think, a concerted effort to build up their lines of scrimmage to fit better into the SEC, and that's really kind of worked out. And, I don't know that Arch Manning ends up living up to all the hype. I don't know that you could live up to that Manning level hype. But my guess is, based on people who are closer to this in Austin than I am, they seem to think that Manning's a pretty good quarterback. I'm going to take them at their word. I do think Texas still counts among the toughest games for Georgia. And if you did have to put your short list of teams that could win the national championship, I think you'd have to put Texas on it. I believe that's true. Another SEC team on this list is Alabama, coming in at number 4. I don't enjoy saying this, and I do say this without full knowledge of who the Alabama starting quarterback is going to be. I do believe, based on the same way we've kind of said, hey, Georgia may be a little undervalued based on the sort of hot take industrial complex and the actual data of the upcoming season. Georgia may be a little undervalued, we would say that. It feels good to say that. That's fun to say. It's not as fun to say that Alabama may be undervalued, but I think they might be. I really do. I think that people are making a big deal out of 9-3 a year ago, transition from Nick Saban. But honestly, when you look at kind of top-end frontline talent, top 100 players, for instance, Alabama's probably still got about as many of them as anybody does. Ryan Williams, more than him in a moment, may be among the very best players in the entire country, regardless of position. Their lines of scrimmage, Overton on defense, a couple of guys on offense, may be about as good as anybody. I do think Alabama still ranks as a really tough competitor here on all of this. Texas A&M's on this list fairly high too, which is a little bit surprising. I don't buy into that very much. Tennessee's still 10th. It's one of the reasons why they're given a 2.3% chance winning the national championship, according to Bill Connelly. It's one of the reasons why we're not making too big of a deal off losing Nico. It's important to note that Tennessee's win total didn't change in light of that news. That I would say that Tennessee minus Nico is in a much better position for success than Nico is minus Tennessee, regardless of who the starting quarterback ends up being. LSU is 12th on this list. They also probably bring in the best group of transfers of anybody in the SEC. They will be among the most hyped teams for like the big turnaround to come into the league. We'll see if that's true. Ole Miss is 13. I would say I'm lower on the market on Ole Miss than others are, but if Austin Simmons is a great quarterback, that could change that. Auburn, the 14th most likely national champion, according to ESPN, FPI, and Bill Connelly. We do believe that this will be a very tough game for Georgia. And a lot of the attention that a Florida gets for a possible turnaround or some of this, that we think that Auburn is actually the one probably more deserving of that discussion. It seems like SP Plus sort of backs us up on that. South Carolina 16th. Oklahoma is 17th, bringing in obviously Mateer and the running back from Cal. Then, of course, Florida is 19th on the list, so a pretty strong representation from the SEC, which is one of the reasons why we think the SEC, from a college ball playoff standpoint, deserves a little bit of a different level of treatment than it kind of gets. Data like this suggests just how much better this league is than almost any other in the country. By the way, speaking of Ryan Williams, weird controversy here where Williams goes on, I guess this is a Barstool show hosted by the former NFL Super Bowl winning coach John Gruden. And I guess Gruden asked Williams about Alabama losing to Vanderbilt a year ago. And Williams makes this grand prediction proclamation. First of all, to give you an idea how far Alabama has fallen, the fact that their offseason trash talk is directed towards Vanderbilt as opposed to towards Georgia or LSU or some team like that, that gives you a little bit of an idea of how far Alabama has fallen. But what Williams says is that this year they're going to treat Vanderbilt like a sledgehammer treats an ant or something along those lines. They're basically going to squash the ant with a sledgehammer, which just gives you an idea of how far this program is from the Nick Saban era. Can you imagine 18-year-old player in the Nick Saban era going on a Barstool Sports streaming video show and talking trash about Vanderbilt? Can you imagine that happening when Nick Saban was the head coach? but that's where Alabama is now. Of course, the Vanderbilt quarterback Diego Pavia has responded to this. So even Kalen DeBoer, I'm guessing he can't love the idea of Alabama giving a team that beat it bulletin board material during the offseason. I'm assuming that Alabama probably beats Vanderbilt this year and does get that revenge. But still, just a weird situation there. So you got a little bit of a war of words right now between Diego Pavia and Ryan Williams. I would say that we can't get enough of that. There was news outside of college athletics yesterday in the university space, more the academic realm, which I do think has at least some relevance to college athletics. Santa Ono is the former president at Michigan, was supposed to take the same job at Florida, but I guess their version of the Board of Regents basically rejected that hire. Now, there is a lot that's controversial about this that I am going nowhere near. There is plenty that could be said about this, and I will say none of those words. I think within the boundaries of football, I think this is also interesting in that I would say that the Michigan president was probably there is certainly the whiff of, institutional involvement in kind of whatever went on with Jim Harbaugh in 2023. And the decision to treat that, I would say, pretty lightly, all things considered. There was a brief suspension for Harbaugh. There's going to be a brief suspension for Sharon Moore here this year. And I think that people sometimes get this confused. The Michigan thing in 2023 was real. This was not a media creation. This was not a, let's find a controversy to all jump up and down about. My earnest belief is it was a real controversy. Michigan did cheat. They benefited from the cheating, and they've essentially gotten away with it. And I do think for this proud institution, Michigan thinks of itself as the nation's top state university. That's what it thinks of itself. And I don't know if it is or not. I don't really care that much about that kind of thing. But they do think of themselves that way. And for a long time, they have kind of turned their nose up at what they think of as the football factories down here in the SEC. And, I mean, anybody even somewhat closely associated with Big Ten country, the programs themselves, their willing accomplices in the media, you don't have to look very far to find the insinuation of cheating around the SEC. Big Ten people love to kind of throw that around. You cheated, you did this, you did that. There's a lot of that kind of thing that goes on. And yet the moment that Michigan found itself close enough to a national title that cheating was sort of worth it, it certainly seems like, at least to my appearances, my viewpoint, that's what they did. And so, as I said before, I won't get into any of the more controversial aspects away from sports that may have prevented this person from becoming the University of Florida president, but I am sort of glad that an SEC school didn't give an embattled Big Ten president a safe landing spot. At the very least, I'm going to be comfortable saying that. By the way, speaking of Florida, noted Florida fan Chipper Jones. I promise we're going to do like 6 seconds on this. We're not going to do a very long thing about this. But Chipper Jones made a lot of news within the college baseball world yesterday for something that he tweeted. If you're my age, you view Chipper Jones as sort of like my generation's Mickey Mantle in many ways. If you grew up when I did, you just love Chipper, and I still do. I think that Chipper is I'm just a big fan of Chipper Jones. Jones yesterday put this out on X. I'm going to read this. He says, "I spent quite a bit of time watching college baseball this weekend. I'll only watch a select few teams from here on out. The reason? They've got coaches that respect the game and their opponents and demand the same of their players. Any team that doesn't wear the uniform correctly, taunts the other team, has a coach that condones this behavior, is a disgrace to the game. Big fan of Coach Snall at Coastal Carolina," which, by the way, this is the third day in a row we've talked about Coastal Carolina baseball here on this show. He says him and his team represent what college baseball should be like. Well done, sir. You stand for proper behavior. So we kind of like this. In fact, we should probably almost give Chipper a golden shoe for this because Chipper's sort of taking a shot at his favorite team, Florida. Of course, he would also say he's a Miami baseball fan because I guess he was going to go play baseball in Miami. I think that's the story. But he's a Florida football fan. So he's taking a little bit of a shot at Florida here on this. But it's also kind of funny. This tweet got a lot of comments. And there's a lot of SEC baseball fans in the comment section like, wait, are you talking about us? Because when it comes to not wearing the uniform the right way, taunting the opponents. There are a lot of baseball teams in the SEC who are like, well, maybe this could be us, including certainly a good number of Georgia fans who are like, wait, is Chipper bashing our team here right now? So I think that's all this goes to show you is college baseball is wild. It is wild. And it's one of those things that because I think there's sort of an artificial lid put on the sport's popularity. I don't think anybody in charge wants college baseball to be any more popular than it currently is. I think that just creates all kinds of headaches in the revenue sharing world if it gets more popular than it currently is. So because it has sort of a lid on its popularity, it also kind of goes unsupervised and kind of chaperoned. And so the stuff that you see during these games is just wild and oftentimes very entertaining too. So Chipper Jones weighing in on that there, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. As we wrap up here today, why don't we give Chipper a golden shoe here on this? Third day in a row, somebody's kind of taking a shot at Florida. We'll give Chipper the golden shoe there for that. That's really fun by him. And, Coastal Carolina getting some love on that, too. It's kind of funny that thing sort of lives on. And anytime somebody's taking a shot at Florida, we're more than happy to do that. In fact, we love taking our shots at Florida here as well when it comes to our Gator Hater Updater. There are a lot of folks who think that Florida's the big turnaround team in the SEC this year. Well, we would say coming up later on this fall, Georgia's got some say in that. And it's not going to try to prevent that from happening. And they've been very good at that in the past. How about 1,670 days? That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. We don't think that number changes anytime soon. We love the fact we're celebrating 10 years of doing this show. And we love the fact that a good number of those years in recent memory have all been spent with Dogs on top. In Jacksonville, maybe in Atlanta in a couple of years, wherever the game is played, we like Georgia to win. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all. By the way, I have that nice little transition. Every day the show just gets fancier and fancier and fancier. I don't get any better, but the show gets fancier, which is really fun. Let us see. Let us see what else here is going on. We'll take some of your comments. Let me do DawgNation.com to begin with here. UGA Marine says that Florida's whole season relies on DJ Lagway's health. And let me be very clear about something. Like, we love being Gator haters, and I love, getting in here and just having fun with Georgia fans. But we're not liars. I do think DJ Lagway's really good. I do. I think Lagway's a really good player. I'm very impressed with DJ Lagway. They kind of knew what they had in him to begin with, and he's really very, very good. I think my issue with Florida overall is it's still a really tough schedule. Like, for the most part, we're going to re-rack everything we said a year ago about SEC schedules because it's the same opponents. You may be flip-flopping the location, but it's the same opponents. I would say that Florida's non-conference schedule is a little easier. They're not playing UCF. They're obviously, we've learned that Florida State's not very good. But it's the same opponents. So this is like that old football cliche that you sometimes hear where, you may be a better team, but your record doesn't reflect it. Did you ever hear that old cliche, where that sort of thing happens? You may be better, but I'm not sure the record reflects it. That may be the issue that Florida runs into. By the way, we didn't talk about this. We should have. I also saw where they call him like their game changer coordinator. Their special teams coaches left to take the job at Houston. Now, if you know anything, we need to do this in the show. I just completely forgot, to be honest with you. If you know anything about Florida, their special teams are terrible. So, it's just been horrendous. Not 11 guys in the field. They've had all kinds of issues. So when you've got that kind of notable problems, and a guy like this is leaving for what you would view as a lesser job, this late in the off season, I guess you can read into that what you want to. Randy Hall says, how much NIL money did Fitzpatrick get from Georgia? I obviously can't say for certain, but given the level of player that he is, you would assume it's big money. Now, is it Mark Bowman, Jackson Cantwell money? I don't know, but you would assume it's big money. You would assume that's the case. Let us see what else. Garrison Tucker says, do you think Austin Riley could be the Chipper Jones of this generation? I think Riley's really very good. I do. I think Riley's really very good. I think that Chipper, though, is, for me, a little bit of a different category. Like I said, some of this is just, like, Chipper was a rookie because of the injury and whatnot. He was a rookie my senior year in high school. So that's a big, like when you're a teenager like that, that's a big deal. Like I remember the battle for Rookie of the Year between Chipper and Hideo Nomo. And it turns out the Braves won the World Series that year and all that kind of stuff. Like that's a pretty formative moment. And like when I got to be old enough kind of to drive myself to the games, buy my own tickets, like Chipper's like the face of the organization during that time. So there's always going to be kind of a sort of a close relationship when it comes to that sort of thing. So yeah, I like Chipper. And I mean, I have to admit that when it comes to a viewpoint on this sort of thing, I do sort of favor Chipper more so than the alternative point. Now, I think that Chipper's like a lot of ex-athletes. It's like the NBA guys all have their podcasts. In the case of Chipper, it's social media. Ex-athletes love trashing current athletes. It's just the world we live in. Ex-athletes love trashing current athletes. That's just the way that it goes. The TNT crew, like a lot of the, like, I don't even like the NBA, but I love the inside the NBA. Does that make sense? And like Shaq and Charles and Kenny, they're just ripping all the current players. The current players hate that. But that's what ex-athletes like to do. So what Chipper's doing here is sometimes you get a little forceful on social media because, I don't know. I mean, we all have a little bit of kids these days vibe in us. But there's also the flip side of that where, do y'all know like the hello fellow kids meme where like there's this sort of try hard mentality where people want to kind of prove how young and hip and cool they are. And the easiest way to do that in sports is to be in favor of all manner of, anything that you feel like the olds don't like, you just sort of rush to the defense of because it makes you feel young, hip, and cool, no matter how uncool and unyoung you might be. This is a little bit of an example of that. I don't think it makes you 1,000 years old to say some of the stuff that goes on in college baseball is a little much. It's a little much. And honestly, like the big stuff we sometimes talk about, but just watch, like every moment in the game is like ultimate swag. Like the batter, the pitch, like everybody's got swag on like every single pitch. It's just exhausting. Like between every pitch, and listen, I love college baseball. I'm kidding it because I love it. Between every pitch, the pitcher's doing his like fire up routine. The batter's like, talking to the like we got to have swag between every pitch. It just gets to be kind of a lot. And I say that as somebody who loves the sport.
I don't know if you saw this, Cody, in the control room.
Hey, Cody.
So Chipper, like a few weeks ago, was calling out Joey Logano. So he was doing NASCAR.
I did see
and
that.
Called out Joey Logano for being a bad teammate. So this seems to be like his thing now, is he's going to watch his sports and then just tweet his hot takes.
Which I'm 100% in favor of. And by the way, I'm in favor of it if I agree or if I disagree. I do like the really vocal ex-athletes. They just kind of make stuff fun. And I saw the Logano thing the other day because, Cody, I know that you've covered NASCAR. I don't know that I knew that Chipper was a NASCAR fan. And obviously Joey Logano is very unpopular with a lot of NASCAR fans. And so the fact that Chipper kind of weighs in on that was like a whole nother layer to his personality that I thought was really interesting because, Chipper may be retired, but he's still young. I mean, he's got a lot of time on his hands. And honestly, I'm sure he probably misses playing. I always felt like he retired too soon because he was still a very high-level player when he retired. So I'm sure that he just gets bored. And so every now and then, it's kind of firing off some heaters probably makes some sense. Like, did you even know he was a NASCAR fan before he ripped Logano?
No, because I don't think I've ever seen – I've seen a lot of guys around the track, a lot of baseball guys around the track, but I've never seen him down there. So, yeah, the fact that he was watching and he called out Joey Logano, and I think they came together a couple days later, and he congratulated him. But I'm wondering, is Chipper like angling himself for his own Barstool's show? He can be the Pat McAfee, or is he just a sports fan who tweets his opinion.
Yeah, see, I think it's actually a really good question. I've thought about this. I don't think he wants to work, because if he did, I think he would be. I mean, if you listen to, and I promise this is not going to be the baseball show, but if you listen to Chipper talking about hitting and things like that, it's clear that he has endless array of knowledge, and he does love sharing it. He loves imparting it to people who want to listen. He loves doing that. So clearly, if he just wanted to go work for a major league team, they'd be glad to have him, but he obviously just must not want to. And it's the same thing for the broadcaster booth too, where like I would say that right now we have we kind of have a dearth of like good broadcasters. Like we could certainly use some more good broadcasters in baseball. And I could see Chipper being kind of like right there alongside of John Smoltz or something like that as like A-list, Fox, or, whoever's going to be the future, rights holder for Major League Baseball, the new Sunday night package, whatever it turns out to be. Like he'd be a great face for that and would be awesome at the job. I just assume he doesn't want to work that hard, because if he did, they'd gladly accept him. Like he'll do the once or twice a year type thing, but clearly he must not want to do more than that, because if he did, he'd just be doing it.
Yeah, and he's gone to the Braves. The Braves have announced him as like their new hitting guy for 4 times, and it's just because he'll go to spring training and do all his stuff with Austin Riley, and then he'll just show up briefly throughout the year. But he does, like you said, he doesn't want a 9 to 5.
Right. Yeah.
He wants to just kind of drop in when he wants to, and the Braves are happy to let him do that, which they should.
Yeah.
Because there are examples of him turning guys' seasons around by fixing their swing.
And I will tell you this, like, not everybody who was a good hitter is good at talking about hitting. I mean, some guys are just not. They don't really know how they did it. They just did it. And that's fair. Your job's not to speak. Your job's to do. But Chipper is also one of those athletes that not only is good at what he did, he's also good at describing how it was that he did it. He does a lot of that stuff on social media all the time. So if you are, dad of a young baseball player or something like that, I mean, honestly, spending a lot of time around the Chipper Jones account, I don't think is a bad thing to do, because he's really good at talking about what it was that he did well, which I think is really interesting. Let's get a few more comments here. G. Gray shouting out Derek Jeter. I'd listen. I'm no Yankee fan, but I do like Jeter. Hard not to like him. Let us see what else. Let's see what else is going on. So Julie C. asking about playing the other SEC teams that didn't play last year. So here's the problem, Julie. We do not have, and I don't think we are close to getting, what we're going to call a permanent scheduling model. So this is coming up on 2025. That will mean that in 3 of the last 5 years, the SEC will have used what they're essentially describing as kind of a one-off schedule. In 2020, they were forced to do that for the pandemic. In 2024, the first year of the new expanded SEC, they couldn't come to an agreement on whether or not they wanted to play 8 games or 9 games and create like a permanent opponent rotation around that, because it's 2 very different things. In theory, what the SEC has said is if we stayed in an 8-game schedule, we could only have 1 permanent opponent. And that's starting to change a little bit now. They're kind of changing their tune on that a little bit. But in theory, if you've got 8 conference games, you're going to have 1 permanent opponent. That gives you 7 rotating games, which gives you a chance to play at the entirety of the league in your place and their place over the course of a 4-year period. And if you did 9 conference games, you could have 3 permanent opponents and still do the same thing. But they can't agree on this for all kinds of reasons. And so they just made up a schedule for 2024 in the hopes that they could figure it out moving forward. Well, then they realized last year they still didn't have agreement. So therefore, they just re-racked the schedule from the previous year, flipped the locations, and now you're playing the same teams again. What will Georgia's schedule look like in 2026? I'm here to tell you, I don't have any idea. Because if you, as you say, Julie, flip the opponents, which some teams are going to want to do, like some of these teams, and Georgia may be one of them to a certain extent, who've played like really tough schedules, they're ready for a break. And so they're going to say, hey, there are 7 other SEC teams we haven't been playing. We'd like to play some of them teams for a little bit here. And there are also some teams, like look at Missouri's schedule this year. We've said before, we're somewhat, if you're looking for an over-under, Missouri over 7.5, we don't think is a bad deal. That's at least a suggestion. Obviously, do your own research. Look at who Missouri plays. Like there are some teams that are playing remarkably easy schedules. And if you're a team that's competing against one of those teams, you're also saying, I'm kind of ready for them to play somebody a little tougher. You're kind of creating these sort of 10-3 type seasons on the back of not exactly a murderer's row. So if we're not going to get a permanent scheduling model, in theory, the league should flip-flop and play the other set of opponents. But I don't know if they will, because in Georgia's case, that'd mean no Tennessee, no Auburn, some of these, big rivals. So that's a good question, Julie. Very good question. Jeffrey Collins says the Florida schedule is brutal. It really is. I mean, I love making fun of Florida, but their schedule is ridiculously tough. And I'm sure they're ready for a break. I'm sure they're ready to say, hey, can we play Missouri's schedule? Can we play Texas's schedule? Can we play one of those teams' schedule? I'm sure they're probably saying that. By the way, Jeffrey Collins says he just got tickets to the Georgia-Bama game. That's awesome. What a cool thing. Julie also mentioning Freddie Freeman's untimely end to his Atlanta career. It's disappointing, right? I mean, disappointing, especially, he's playing great for L.A., beloved figure. You wish that could have been different. Let us see what else. Garrison talking about Oklahoma in here. I just have my suspicions that some of this Oklahoma talk is overstated. I just do. I think somebody asked about Oklahoma, Texas a minute ago. I don't believe I ended up answering it. I just think that because Oklahoma has sort of won the offseason by bringing in the quarterback, by bringing in the running back, Mateer and the guy from Cal, I just think that people are kind of making too big of an extrapolation. I sort of think that's going to probably end up not happening, but that's kind of just an assumption. Let's see what else. Savannah Bryan says he watched the Braves on Apple TV on Friday. Says you can listen to either team's hometown radio broadcast. Wouldn't that be awesome in college football? Yeah, Brian, I think that would be. And I think in some form or fashion, doesn't it seem like we're due for a major technological advance in sports at some point in time where you're not only like choosing your own broadcast team from many broadcast teams, but maybe you're choosing your own camera angle too. I mean, like you get the chance to play director in your own living room. Doesn't it seem like we've got to be getting close to that? And I know that you have some version of that when you have like the multi-channels. The ESPN will do like the, whatever they call it, the big broadcast thing where they'll have it on all the different networks. You have some version of that now. But I'm talking about a little bit more of an under control thing. The other thing I sort of halfway predict is, I think as drone technology gets better, because like there's a little bit of a safety issue with flying drones over people's head. As drone technology gets better, I think drones could be a game changer from a camera standpoint, where, the camera angles for how we watch sports, especially football, are essentially the same as they always were. You have some addition, like the spider cam changes everything. But I think that we may see a dramatic increase in the kind of interesting camera angles that we get. A lot of this coming from drones. I think that could be coming next. I also would watch, that one like big theater. I think the first location was in Texas. I think there may be one coming to Atlanta where it's like you're in the theater and it looks like you're in the stadium. I think somehow, some way there could be more of that, especially in this future world where we're not quite so sure what movie theaters. I mean, and listen, I'm pro movie theater. I'm rooting for the Mission Impossible movie coming up. I probably won't even go see it. I just don't care. But I am rooting for its success because I do like movie theaters. We had a nice thing in a movie theater the other day for my daughter. I like movie theaters. I want them to exist. But in a world in which movie theaters are not quite so, we're not quite so sure what their future is, mostly because movies are terrible. I do think sports in a movie theater style thing could also become a little bit more of a thing. And I would watch some of the technology around that. Let's see what else. SEM Dog says, Chipper's threatening to join me on the front porch and tell the kids to get off my lawn. Let me tell you what which is funny from SEM. Let me tell you what I think is a healthy viewpoint on life. I think if you're solely, to use the cliche that SEM uses, if you're solely get off my lawn, I would say that's not a healthy perspective. But if there are no issues on which you are kind of get off my lawn, old traditionalist on, I would say that's also not healthy either. Because both of them are being influenced by more than just your own, I guess, perception. You're either shaped by what you're trying to hold on to, which is your youth, or you're kind of shaped by your anger you don't have anymore, which is also your youth. That I would say a healthy person has a array of takes that kind of fall on both sides of the get off my lawn viewpoint. The received wisdom of the ages is valuable. But life is also a dynamic, ever-changing thing. And finding somebody to reflect both those things in your viewpoint on the world is probably valuable. Let's see. Brooke Dog says, ESPN tried a college basketball game where they did the whole game from the half-court camera, so it felt like you were sitting in the front row. It did not go well. Yeah, but Brooke, I don't know if you've seen, and I don't even know if we can show it, this new technology is outrageous. I mean, I haven't been to it and seen it in person, but it's like the concave, it's almost like the Vegas sphere, not that big, but it's shaped in a concave manner where you sit in there. And it's not like the old Disney World when you were a kid where they had the, what do you call it? The sort of like the 360 vision or something like that, where you could kind of turn around and see the screen. It's more than that. Like, this is like immersive. This is, I think this is going to be a huge deal. I think it's going to be a huge deal. It's not an ad for them either, but I think it's going to be a very big deal. Let me go to Facebook. See how they are doing on the Facebook side of things. On Facebook eventually. You can tell that Facebook is like the oldest social media platform because it loads like a transistor radio. Good gracious, it can't be this hard. All right, here we go. Ken Holcomb says he loves Austin Riley, but he'll not be the Chipper Jones of his generation. Yes, Chipper's a better third baseman. I do think Austin's become a better fielder. I do think that. I think, though, the one of the things that separates Chipper is he was a switch hitter. And on the list of like all-time switch hitters, I made the comparison to Mickey Mantle a little earlier. On the list of very best switch hitters ever, Chipper and Mickey are on that same list. Probably Eddie Murray's probably on that list too. Okay, so what's it called, Cody? All right, so it's called Cosm, and this is a little bit of what it looks like. And I don't think this probably does it justice, but when you're in there, the kind of like I said, this is not an ad. I mean, they're coming to Atlanta. Maybe we should not give them a free ad because maybe they'll come be a sponsor. But I just think that the point I'm getting to is whether it's this thing or something that's at your own home, I think we've got to be due for a major breakthrough in how we watch sports. I just think it's got to be on the way. I just think it has to be. And I do think I would watch a space like this to see how how much they can kind of get, you're not just watching the TV broadcast on a big screen. You're watching a broadcast that emanates from the venue. I think there could be something interesting with that. That is good stuff. Philip Jordan Wells says YouTube ain't exactly brand new either. That is a fair point. Tennille Calvino encouraging folks to boycott the famous alcohol brand that is closely connected to one of the SEC teams. They obviously do give a lot of money to an SEC university. I don't deny that. I also know a lot of Georgia fans who very much enjoy that product. I do indeed. So that is a uphill challenge for sure, but not an inaccurate point. Let's see what else. Ralph Price going back to the Connor Stallions days. Yeah, I mean, listen, I just think that's real. I just think it was real. It got coded as a low status opinion to believe that, but I am not afraid of low status opinions, as you can readily see. This got coded as something that unsophisticated people believed in, but no less true for me. I do believe that Michigan cheated. I think the cheating aided their national championship. I think institutionally Michigan decided to dare somebody to do something about it, and they've gotten away with it in all manner of ways. Barry Watkins says we should get Oklahoma next year, not Texas. Yeah, Oklahoma coming here, going to Norman, that'd be kind of fun. You haven't played LSU in forever. I'm sort of now kind of hopeful that Georgia never plays at Texas A&M. It's sort of like the thing, just see the other day where John Tyler's grandson died, that within the last decade, John Tyler had 2 living grandsons. And until like a week ago, this is the 10th president of the United States. The 10th president of the United States. Until like a week ago, he still had a living grandson. So just a really weird, a lot of people know this, it's just a really weird piece of trivia, which I'm obsessed with, that sort of thing. But the 10th president of the United States, until like a couple of weeks ago, had a living grandson. It's one of those things that people just sort of like to say they knew. If you're curious, I want to say the oldest living grandson now of a former president, it might be Grover Cleveland. It's somebody, but it used to be John Tyler, who was the 10th president of the country. It's crazy. Anyway, Georgia not playing at Texas A&M is sort of the version of, hey, did you know that John Tyler still has a grandson? The fact that, you know, Georgia's never played at College Station. And so much like I was always rooting for John Tyler's grandson, just sort of hang on. I'm sort of rooting for Georgia to just never play at Texas A&M. I want that trivial footnote to never go away. Garrison Duggar says he'd love for Georgia to come to Norman. Yeah, playing some of these teams, hadn't played LSU in forever, except for the SEC championship. Oklahoma, newcomer to the SEC. Yeah, I like playing at South Carolina. I think it'd be fun. So yeah, seeing some of those teams maybe next year on the schedule. And by the way, talk about like, the NFL has like schedule reveal. Like we're going to have a real schedule reveal for the SEC because I don't know what they're going to do. How many common opponents they'll keep, because you do have like Tennessee, Bama, Georgia, Auburn, things like that you probably want to protect. By the way, Randy Hall asked a good question. He says, when we're going to start our call-ins? That's a good question. That's a good question, Randy. We need to do that soon. By the way, I have also been working on getting the stickers in the mail. So for those of you who are waiting on those are on the way. All right. We've got to get ready to go. Anything else before we go? By the way, I think that Tennille said, did Tennille say this, that she'd been to one of those Cosm places? Did she say that? No, it was Brian Whitaker who said that. I thought it was Tennille. All right, anything else? Let me go back to YouTube for a second. Alan Hampton on the subject of Brock Bowers, Stetson Bennett. So Georgia said they're not going to retire any more numbers. I do think that Brock Bowers is an all-time great. For me personally, Herschel Walker is the greatest college football player of all time. But I do think that Bowers is an all-time great for sure. And now, he did get his Georgia degree, so I guess now that puts him eligible for the Ring of Honor, which I'm guessing could happen for him probably pretty soon. Foster Moss on the subject of Georgia being 9-3 and making the playoff. I just don't think that's likely to happen. I don't. I just think that, at least for now, I sort of view 10-2 as a pretty, strong line of demarcation. I do see it that way. Also, I do think that's a little bit of splitting the baby of, I think they'll go 9-3, but still make the playoff. 9-3 was not good enough to playoff a year ago. 10-2 was good enough for the national championship. That's why Georgia's win total is so interesting. I do this for a living. I kind of know where to sort of draw the wedge on the topics. So let us see what else. All right, we got to get ready to go. Y'all check out RS Andrews online. Love my friends at RS Andrews, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. I like my AC to keep me cool, but if I have a plumbing emergency, I got to have that fixed, and I mean right away, and that's what RS Andrews is all about. The RS stands for Rapid Service. So you can find them online at rsandrews.com. That is rsandrews.com. Check them out today. Y'all, appreciate you being here. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.